بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم أخلصنا نيتنا والأعمالنا يا أرحم الراحمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أيها الإخوة والأخوات والمشاهدون الكرام جميعا أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم أينما كنت. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اليوم معنا فضيلة الأستاذ والشيخ دكتور تاج الإسلام، هو الشيخ والدكتور في علوم الإسلامي في جامعة ليدز في الإنجلند وفي بريطانيا. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بك يا شيخ.
جزاكم الله خير. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. لقد سررت بهذه الفرصة المباركة لأن أشارك معكم العلماء الكرام والأخوات والإخوة الكرام، ولأنني أدرس هذه العلوم التي قال الشيخ يحيى في جامعة ليدز. غالبا أدرسها باللغة الإنجليزية، ولذلك أفضل أن أتكلم باللغة الإنجليزية، وأحيانا ربما أتكلم باللغة البنغالية. So إذا تستأذن لي أن أكلم باللغة الإنجليزية شيخ يحيى إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله نحن نتكلم باللغة الإنجليزية تقريبا. اليوم إن شاء الله نحن نريد منك الكلمة الطيبة. ما معنى المنطق بين المنطق والوحي؟ ما معناهما يا شيخنا؟
إن شاء الله. So I'll start in English. Right? So there has been since the early days of Islam a conflict, a niza'. So niza'un bayn al-aqli wal naql, a conflict between reason and revelation. And this type of epistemological conflict, this type of ilmi niza' permeates a lot of the sciences as well. First of all, let's look at what is wahi. Wahi is something that revelation is something which is supernatural in many ways. Right? We cannot explain the type of communication. It's the communication with the ghaib, so the world of the unseen. Whereas aql is something which is derived from the sensory perceptions or sensoria, and we deduce knowledge from this. So aql and naql in many of the other religious traditions as well. So the debate is old. The Yahud and the Nasara as well, when they engaged with foreign knowledge, and by foreign knowledge, largely it was Greek knowledge, and to some extent Brahman, and also you can say some Buddhist philosophy as well. And this came in the early generations of Islam, when the Muslims were very much engaged in the production of knowledge and in also developing their own self-confidence, their self-awareness. The Muslims had inherited two empires, so something very different from the Christians. When the Christian destiny changed. So if we look at the first 300 years of Christianity, we tend to see a religious tradition which is very much focused on shahada. And what I mean by shahada, I mean dying fi sabilillah, right? So martyrdom in itself. And in their tradition, the way how they look at Christ. So for them, Isa alayhi salam is the ultimate shaheed, right? We say ma qataluhu ma salabuhu. However, what happens over time is they're treated as a heretic sect of Judaism. So as they're treated as a heretic sect of Judaism, they're further persecuted by the Romans. And what the Romans do is they tend to feed them to the lions, the Christians. But then something happens. The the hearts of these Romans softened towards really Christian sacrifice by seeing so many of these Christians that they're just massacring, and yet the Christians are doing nothing in return. Constantine converts to Christianity, and by that conversion, like the destiny of Christianity changes. What is that destiny? Suddenly, Christianity has to decide that there is such a thing as war. So the just war thesis emerges out of this. And from that, also, foreign knowledge comes in. And part of that foreign knowledge is, if you like, the shirki knowledge, polytheistic knowledge of the Greeks and also the Romans as well. And some of the pagans as well, and other religious traditions. So they had to engage with this type of foreign knowledge. However, right, having said this, it was actually the Muslims who were the most confident in dealing with this. So if we think of the akal nakal type of encounter, the encounter of religion with effectively Greek rationalism, you see that the Muslims were actually at the forefront of this. They even propelled the confidence of Jews and also later the Christians, right? The Jews, especially, we can see this in Andalusia with Rabbi Maimonides, also Ishaq Israeli, and many of the others, if you like, rabbis of the Muslim world. Maimonides.
Can I just interject here? I just want to welcome the audience who are watching. আপনারা যারাই দেখতেছেন সবাইকে আমাদের এই তুজাহাল উম্মার ফেস উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে শুভেচ্ছা স্বাগতম জানাচ্ছি। আপনারা যারা যেখানে আছেন অবশ্যই লাইক করবেন, শেয়ার করবেন, ফলো করবেন, কমেন্টস করবেন। আমাদের সাথে আজকে গেস্ট প্রফেসর ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, এই ইংল্যান্ডের যে খুব সুনামধন্য একটা ইউনিভার্সিটি, সেটা হলো লিডস ইউনিভার্সিটি, ওইখানের ইসলামিক স্টাডিজ এর প্রফেসর। আজকে আমরা সাবজেক্ট ম্যাটার যেটা, সেটা হইলো গিয়া ওয়াহি, যুক্তি এবং ওয়াহি, অথবা এই যেটা বলা হয় মান্তিক এন্ড ওয়াহি, অথবা আকল এবং নাকল নিয়ে কি আমরা আলোচনা করতেছি, যে যুক্তির জায়গাটা কোথায় এবং ওয়াহির জায়গাটা কোথায়, এবং এই দুইটাকে কিভাবে আমাদের দিনের শিক্ষা এবং দিনে কিভাবে কাজে লাগাইতেছে, ওইটা দুইটা নিয়ে কি কোনো কনফ্লিক্ট আছে আমাদের ভিতরের থেকে অথবা বাইরে থেকে কি। তো কিছু ইতিহাস নিয়ে আলোচনা করতেছেন উনি। তো সবাইকে অনুরোধ করবো যে আপনারা লাইক করবেন, শেয়ার করবেন, ফলো করবেন, কমেন্টস করবেন, এবং আমরা সবাইকে আবার শুভেচ্ছা স্বাগতম জানাচ্ছি এই তুজাহাল উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে, ফেস উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে, এবং আমরা ওয়েলকাম করতেছি ওয়ান্স এগেইন। ওয়েলকাম ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, please you can continue. Jazakallah khair.
So the Muslims actually did propel the confidence of many other religious traditions as well. So if you like, you've used the word mantik. Mantik essentially means speech, right? So the human being, or the rational being, becomes the haywanun natiq. So we become the reasonable creature, but really we are the speaking creature in that sense. But speech itself is reasoning. That's what makes us different from the primates or monkeys and other types of animals that actually communicate, like dolphins and birds as well. So what happens is a translation movement occurs at the time of Caliph al-Ma'mun and the Bayt al-Hikmah, a type of academy like in Athens, in Baghdad at the time. And this translation bureau includes Ibn al-Muqaffa, many Christians who converted to Islam, and the patronage of the Caliph really invested so much on translating foreign knowledge. And that translation of foreign knowledge, you can argue there's an imperial narrative behind it as well. You need it to empower yourself. Knowledge is power as well. It's not just weapons, right? You need knowledge. You need to know what your rival empires, the types of fields that they excel in as well. You should be able to at least express some interest in this. And it started off with actually astronomy as well, and ilm al-falak, also with ilm al-hisab, so mathematics as well. Now the mathematics, largely we took some of the basics from the Greeks, so Pythagoras' theorem, some aspects of obviously the invention of the Indians, the zero was something we took from the Indians, and then even the numbering of the Quran. The Arabs still call it Rakam Hindi in terms of how they translate these, how they incorporate into our tradition. So we always give credit to where we took it from. So Rakam Hindi, still we say the Indians gave us the numbering. And with the Greeks, we still say Aristotle, our philosophers at least, they say Al-Mu'allim al-Awwal, right? He's the first teacher, and then the others. So in terms of this Aql and Naql divide, there were a number of group of ulama, scholars, right? Many of them were philosophers, but we have to remember every educated Muslim was a madrasa graduate, right? So even the most heretic of Muslims we can think of, they were still mullahs in that sense. So one of the most prominent who influenced Islamic ilm al-kalam, and including Sunni kalam, if you like, was Abu Ishaq al-Kindi. So Abu Ishaq al-Kindi was a very subtle philosopher. He argued that there la ta'aruda bain al-aqli wal naql. There is no, so before even Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and many of the others, Imam al-Ghazali and others, Abu Ishaq al-Kindi said that there is no conflict between reason and revelation. It's, Imam Razi later on says this as well, that it's nurun ala nur, wahyun ala al-aql, if you like. So there has to be. So what these philosophers argued is that the prophets of God, the philosophers tell us that Allah is mawjood, that Allah exists, even though Allah is munazzahu anil wujud. He transcends time and space, zaman wa makan, la yajri alayhi zaman wa makan. On the other hand, we have the idea that from the prophets. So if the philosophers, if all the philosophers are telling us, the Ahlul Fitra are telling us this, right? Aboriginal peoples know that God exists, Allah is mawjood. So what's the function of the prophets? So the prophets tell us Allah is ma'bud, right? Fa'alam annahu la ilaha illallah. You already know this, Allah exists, right? So worship Him. Now, for that matter, many of the philosophers argued that the prophets are inspired philosophers. So the prophets are effectively rationalists, but their rationalism is direct rationalism with God in that sense, right? Whereas the philosophers is, their own ijtihad, if you like. So through ijtihad, they've gained inspiration, whereas the prophets is with a direct illumination of the heart that they've had that connection with God. So Abu Ishaq al-Kindi said there is no conflict between rationality and revelation. Now, these things can become difficult because there are always exceptions in syllogisms, in arguments. So, for example, if we use the syllogism, the qiyas, and by the qiyas, I don't mean the qiyas al-shar'i here, I mean qiyas al-mantaqi here. So you have a first premise, qadiyat al-ula or al-muqaddama, that all Greeks are mortal, right? Or Socrates is a Greek. Right, so all Greeks are mortal. Socrates is a Greek, therefore Socrates is a mortal. Right. Now, sometimes these syllogisms they break down. Right. So Imam Ghazali supports this syllogism, this qiyas, if you like. That qiyas is actually quite good, and this is the reason why we can understand even in fiqh, the Zahiris and the Shias as well, they rejected qiyas, is because sometimes qiyas breaks down. So if we say Kullu ibn Adam khata and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is ibn Adam, then obviously if we say, well, he makes mistakes, then there's a big problem there, right? And this is the reason why Ibn Taymiyyah says that qiyas is not always reliable, and this is what we find in his Radd al al-Mantiqiyin and also in Ta'arud al-Aqli wal Naql. So you have al-Kindi saying that there is no conflict, but then you have Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and many of the others, that they start saying things like there are traditions from Imam Ali, lo yu'khadhul deenu bil ra'i. So if deen was taken through rationality, then it make more sense to wipe the bottom of the socks rather than the top of the socks, if you like, right? Now, from that, we understand that there's another group, So one group is saying that it's absolutely there's no conflict whatsoever. Then another group is saying that no, there will be conflict, and when there is conflict between revelation and rationality, we shall prefer revelation. So the technical term they use, taqdeem al-naqli ala al-aql, right? So they use that. Whereas the group that we're just talking about, Kindi and many of the Sunni ulama are saying la ta'arud bain al-aqli wal-naql. Then there's a group, a minority group who were popular in the early days. They were called the Islamic Neoplatonists. They were influenced by the teachings of a philosopher called Plotinus, not Aflatun, as Plato, as Aristotle's teacher. So Plotinus was one of the few Greek philosophers who very much sounded like a Jew or a Christian, because he only spoke about one God, a transcendent God. And this transcendence, then really that tanzih influences a lot of our kalam positions that we see. Now, from his influence was a famous philosopher called Abu Nasr al-Farabi. Farabi is known for his Madinat al-Fadila, if you like, his virtuous city. And he influenced a lot of Ismaili and also Twelvashi philosophy. The philosopher king, Wilayat-e-Faqih, his idea was very similar to that of Aristotle and others. And so Farabi actually went one step further, which was very controversial as well and problematic. He argued if there's a conflict between revelation and rationality, he'd go with rationality. He'd actually just, for him, there's no problem with accepting what's there in rationality. And the strange thing is, this is how then do you recognize your faith as a believer? With him, he just well, Quran is true, philosophy is true. Philosophy tries to arrive at truth, Quran arrives at truth, but we can only understand things through rationality. This was his view. So for some time, the debate then occurred. Well, where does revelation fit in all of this, and where does rationality fit? So we had one group of theologians. We had the Sunni theologians who argued that, well, if there is a problem between rationality and revelation, we'll stick with revelation. So that was Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and later on, if you like, the Hanbali Mutakallimin. And I'm saying that they were Hanbali Mutakallimin. They were from the Ahl al-Kalam as well. And that includes Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, Abdurrahman ibn Jawzi as well, and some of the others, Muhammad Salim al-Safarini. And on the other hand, you had those who argued that there is no conflict between rationality and revelation. So this debate, if we can actually look at it, and I'm going to just share with you now, and those of you Afna Lazara Madrasa Taqi Fariq wa Ulama Karam, there's on each level of knowledge, we can see how Aql and Naql debate is not just on the issues of how we understand the Quran, so how we understand the Quran in that sense, and knowledge in general, but all types of knowledge. So if you could just bear with me a minute so I can look at my just some notes. So what we see is one of the easiest ways of recognizing this Aql and Naql debate is through the prism of Quran, of understanding the Quran. So on the one hand, we have a tafsir bil ra'i, so tafsir through hypothetical opinion. So another word for aql is ra'i. So this is one of the early words that they actually use, is ra'i. And for naql was later the word that they used was earlier the word that they used was ma'thur, so athar. Now these words as well, there was a development in other religious traditions as well happening at the same time. So the Muslims were experimenting. Now, whilst they were experimenting, we could see that this type of approach on all the sciences. So if you like an Akali approach to, so I'll look at Arabic, so Al-Lugha al-Arabiya, Al-Kalam, Al-Fiqh, Wal-Akhlaq, and I'm using Akhlaq in the broadest terms here. So it includes Suluk, Zuhud, Tasawwuf, those type of things. Ulum al-Hadith and Ulum al-Quran. So if we think of an Akli way of approaching, a Nakli way of approaching grammar, Ilm al-Nahu. So what we see is Ilm al-Nahu and what was called Fiqh al-Lugha, lexicography, is very Nakli in its approach. And they used to say about the Kufis, Ahl al-Kufa, that they were Muhaddithi and Nahu. So what they would do, they would just report all of the views on grammar. So that's very much what the Kufans would do. Whereas the Ahl al-Basra, as we understand now, like they were more interested in linguistics. And remember, many of them were Persian speakers as well. And philology, which is the study of the words, the meaning of the words themselves. So you can see that is more of an Akli approach to the study of Arabic language. Likewise with Ilm al-Kalam, you see the approach of, I mentioned Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and others as well. They've got a traditionalist approach to Ilm al-Kalam. So very much they'll be quoting Quran and Hadith, largely Hadith. And even those mutakallimin were called the muhaddithun, or the Ahl al-Hadith of Kalam. And then you have the rationalist mutakallimun, who are sorry, I've got a niece who's got some learning difficulties. You might start screaming. Mutakallimun, Ahl al-Kalam. So they were called the mutakallimun, and those in the early days they included the Mu'tazilites, and later on we had Sunni variants and of these. And then in fiqh, we're all familiar with the Ahl al-Hadith. So the Ahl al-Hadith fuqaha, which included Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Shafi, Dawud al-Zahiri, to some extent Imam Malik, not always. And then you had the Imam Abu Hanifa and many others, like even Sufyan al-Thawri and others, and also the non-Sunni Jafaris and Ibadis and others. In ethics, you had the Zuhud. So a Nakli approach to ethics was the Zuhud and Suluk that we find in many of the, right now, even in the Salafi traditions now, I'm talking about new Salafi traditions, where you got Tazkiyat al-Nafs type literature or approaches. And then you got the Sufic mysticism, which is the rational approach to Sufism, the Tasawwuf of the Maulana Rumis of this world and many of the others. And then in Hadith studies as well, we have this same approach, the Naqd al-Sanad approach of Al-Bukhari, Muslim, and many of those Muhaddithin. And then you have the Naqd al-Sanad approach, or an Akli approach of Imam al-Tahawi and some of the others, right? And then lastly, on Quranic studies, we see this, the Ma'thur approach to Quran, which is Quran itself, Hadith, and the Sahaba and the Tabi'in's views on the tafsir. And then the hypothetical or Ra'i approach or Akli approach of Quran, which is largely linguistics, sometimes Jahili poetry. In our times now, you could say it's the literary approach, the scientific approach, and many of these other things. So what we can see is how does Aql and Naql, so the Naqli approach, there are some things that are mentioned by the ulama regarding Naql, right? So Allama ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi actually says, Al-Naql la yufidu illa al-qat', yufidu al-qat', sorry, yufidu al-qat'. So Naqli knowledge, so all knowledge that's actually Sima'i in that sense, right? It's been handed down to us, is categorical knowledge. It means knowledge which is ala ra'si wal ayn, that we have to follow it, right? But the other traditions, so Imam Razi on the other hand says, al-naqlu la yufidu illa dhann. So what he's arguing, other than kalam Allah kalam salah, you have anything that's been handed down to us. That includes the hadith traditions, fiqh, and our approaches to the ulum. La yufidu illa zan. So all of this is conjectural. In other words, it means it's for us it's we can do some ijtihad there. Now, how long has this permeated? To this day, we still have this. I'll mention by way of example here is when the Darul Uloom Deoband was founded. Maulana Qasim Nanotwi is actually someone we've overlooked. So there's two approaches, even in the Deoband, which was Akli and Nakli in a sense. So the Nakli approach is very much they've established themselves, during the 19th and 20th century. But the founder, if you like, Maulana Qasim Nanotwi Sahab, his approach was far more Akli. And in fact, if his emphasis was on ulum falsafa, hikmah, those type of things, I think we would have had a different trajectory with not just Darul Deoband, but many of the traditional madaris in the subcontinent and beyond as well. In fact, when I was a student in Mauritania, I came across an alim who studied in an Algerian alim who studied in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, all three countries. And I remember him saying something like, well, in Bangladesh, there's a lot of, so remember this was the early 2000s, actually late 90s, early 2000s. What he said was, he studied in the 90s. He said that the ulama of Bangladesh very much concentrated on mantiq and those type of sciences. And as if it was a negative, right? And unfortunately, it's to our detriment that we find this, and I'm saying this as someone who's studied in the Sunni tradition, is that we've not been able to, because we completely abandoned the Akli approach, ulum al-Aqliya. Very much now we see, the Shia ulama far more conversant in these, and it's the same text that we always had. It's nothing. They've not had any extra falsafa books as such. The really overlooking Qasim Nanotwi Saab's approach was something that we could hopefully re-engage again in, because it is important. Look, some of the yesterday I just spoke on liberation theology, and basically about politics as well, right? The Muslim Ummah, look, right now, Tijah al-Ummah, we're facing the Ummah. The Ummah is in such a crisis right now, a crisis of identity as well as power. We are impoverished wherever we are at the moment. So for Naql, if we argue, one of the questions I think Yahya Bhai asked me was, what's the role of Naql? So without Naql, right, we don't really, the role of Aql is there as a gift from Allah in that sense. But the guidance that we have is from Naql. So it's through Allah's Kalam. So our ulama, when they argue that what are the sources of the sciences, especially in Ilm al-Kalam, they first argue that it's the Quran and then the Hadith, or the Quran and Hadith together. And secondarily, they said it's Aql, because it's through Aql that we could appreciate Kalam Allah, because Allah says in the Quran, فَأَتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. And to use our minds, we may make mistakes, and this is why even in the Hadith traditions, Rufi'ana ummati al-khata' wal nisyan wa mastukriha alayh, that the ummah is, since we're talking about the ummah, is forgiven for their mistakes and their forgetfulness. And also sometimes we forget this, mastukrihu alayh, what they've been compelled to do. Now sometimes that could be our umara, those who are in power, and they've compelled us to do things which otherwise we wouldn't have done. And it may be even our ulama karam, if they're making mistakes. Remember, not all the ulama karam are the same throughout the world. They may have made ijtihadi decisions that could be detrimental. Myself, if I've said something wrong and someone runs with this, it could be as well. So hopefully, as a whole, the ummah could be forgiven on this.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. We're coming back. Sheikh,
Yes, sorry, I didn't hear anything you said.
my apologies. Sorry. Carry on.
Oh, sorry, what is it you said?
I've just welcomed everyone, those who have just joined, so you can continue on the discussion that you are on.
Okay,
basically.
yeah,
Thank you.
so we were saying about the Akal and Nakal approach and how we, over time, so if we get to the 19th century, so not only the Deoband as well, but also Sheikh, what we see is a certain, a very influential scholar, and the links with the subcontinent is obviously there as well, is someone who studied in, it was Jamaluddin Afghani, Sayyid Jamaluddin Afghani, who was very much engaged in the Jang-e-Azadi as well, trying then in 1860s, trying to help the liberation of India from the British Raj. He ended up in Egypt afterwards, after trying to liberate India, if you like. So when he got to Egypt, he in Egypt and also in Turkey at the time, so part of the Ottoman Empire. So he was a Hanafi scholar who, when he got to Al-Azhar, he very much influenced some Maliki scholars, Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, some Hanbali scholars like Sheikh Rashid Rida, and many of the others. I think Khairuddin Zirkili was a Shafi. And so what happened was a new renaissance as well. So a new sort of what they had in the early days, the translation movement. Again, we saw something where they called it the Nahda al-Arabiya. And very much they pushed forward the idea of the Aql approach again. But the way they did it is, and this is where it's important to understand the foundations of the Tajdeed and Islah movements of the 20th century as well. What they argued is the best way we can look back and regain, if you like, re-establish our position in the production of knowledge is to look back at the early days. So they called it Da'wat al-Salafiyya, these Egyptian scholars. Now, this is not to be confused with the Harakat al-Salafiyya in the Saudi as such. However, the influence is there without doubt. Sheikh Rashid Rida's Tafsir al-Manar has influenced Sheikh Nasiruddin al-Albani and others. But nonetheless, what they pushed forward is the idea of Aql itself. And Aql itself has to be guided by the Kitab and the Sunnah. And from there, we saw these scholars, especially Rashid Rida. He actually went to India. And when he went to India, he saw the potential of the madrasas, right? This is something he mentions, that he just didn't know that the Sunnah has been preserved in a place like India, where for so long, obviously, there hasn't been that much, the only correspondence really is in Hajj, where they realize that there are some major players in Hadith, in Ilm al-Hadith in India. In fact, most of the Asanid al-Muttasila are very much these Deoband, Ahl Hadith, Barelvi ulama who have actually got these Asanid. And it's all Shah Waliullah. All of them, the daddy is Shah Waliullah. Shah Waliullah Sahab, Imam Suyuti. going back to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So, and this is something that Sheikh Rashid Rida and many of the others, and it also shows the international link of all of these traditions. That he actually went to Darul Uloom Deoband, Sheikh Rashid Rida. The only difference is in our times now is that we ought to look at the fact that many of these religious reformers as well, I'm using the word reformers in the sense of their muslihin, not necessarily the Christian term reform, which is absolutely changing from the tradition. Many of them are, you can consider them liberation theologians. That word itself, liberation theologian, we've only really used for people like Malcolm X, maybe Allama Iqbal, in the Shia tradition, Ali Shariati. These are Sunni Shias, or who are, they might not have the same training as their ulama, but nonetheless they represent the voice and the spirit of these movements. So the role of Naql itself is something which, because of the tradition, because of how long the Ummah has had to expound upon the Quran and the Sunnah traditions, most of it is very much, look, it is an intellectual enterprise. So yes, there's an element of it being spiritual, there's an element of it being religious, without doubt, because it's Diyanat and we do these things. But nonetheless, think about it like this. Ulama Ikram, those of you who are listening, Jazakumullah khair for the services that you've given to the deen. What you've noticed that even non-Muslim scholars, they want to study the Quran, they want to study the Sunnah, they want to study the Arabic language. And why do they do this? Wherever their ulterior motives might be, they still find, if you like, intellectual ladha. They find something very stimulating in learning about the deen in that sense. And it is, and the way how we should talk about the deen as an intellectual experience as well as a spiritual one for people. With this in mind, Yahya Bhai, would you like to?
Yes, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair. I've got, we will come with in questions, but I think also through comments, I think the thing is the idea of Aql and Naql, or reason and revelation. Sometimes there is an assumption that there is a massive clash, okay? Obviously, you've tried to highlight that, some people saw it as there is no clash. Others saw it as, well, we give precedence to the revelation over the reason, if you like. What I would want to know, the thing is there a place for reason and revelation in overall religious thought across the globe? So within the, if you like, in the roots of the Judaic tradition, in the Christian tradition, as well as the Muslim tradition, or is this much more of a later phenomenon we're talking about? So like essentially within religious thinking, is there a comfortable space for reason and revelation?
Okay, that's an excellent question you've asked. This is one, actually, sometimes we overlook Imam Ibn Rushd, Abul Walid Ibn Rushd. We tend to just focus on his Bidayat al-Mujtahid book, but there are some manuscripts that we haven't translated. Like he's got a commentary on the Republic of Aristotle, Plato's Republic.
Plato's Republic.
Yeah, he's actually got a commentary on that. Now that would be fascinating to see, look, what he has to say, because look, many of our ulama who, like from the harakas, especially Ikhwan al-Muslimun, Jamaat-e-Islami, Hizbullah as well from the Shia side, they're all trying to figure out Islamic political theory. And when they did that, so Iqbal as well, so preceding Maulana Maududi and others as well, is the ideas were already there, because our scholars were looking at books like the Republic, and they thought of the way how they spoke about the caliphate was like the philosopher king, or the emirates, as the Ibadis were, like a shura, a type of democracy, or an imamate, like a theocracy, as many of the Shias have looked at. So Ibn Rushd, what is fascinating about Ibn Rushd is Ibn Rushd actually speaks about something which later on becomes Fazlur Rahman and many of these other modern philosophers take on, is the idea of double truth. Right, so it's called double truth meaning theory. So the Aql and Naql chasm, he was probably one of the most influential philosophers who tried to bridge that gap between Aql and Naql. And he argued that the best way of doing this is actually, and this is where science comes into it, Yahya Bhai, right, about what do we do with scientific theories and then the Quranic narratives of, especially, for example, the creation story is the easiest one that people pick up, evolution and creation story. How do you reconcile these things? So what Imam Ibn Rushd argued is that, look, what is necessarily true in philosophy and science doesn't need to be true in religion, right? So what he argued is that these double truth theory. So what he argued is, on the one hand, he could be an Aristotelian in his philosophy. He could believe that the world has existed forever. Remember, these are still theories that people are arguing. Was there the Big Bang theory? Was there, has the universe been around forever? Obviously, for us, that's shirky. Nonetheless, they argued this because the Greeks were the ones who argued this, right? And then he's arguing that, so he's arguing he's an Aristotelian in his philosophy, right? Yeah, he's an Ash'ari in his Aqidah as a Sunni, right? And even though there are loggerheads, somehow he's managed to pigeonhole one in the other. Now, this is something you've actually brought up. How then could we have dealt with this? And really, there's a famous Orientalist scholar called Ignaz Goldziher, and Goldziher actually mentions this in his. So if I could just get the quote, it's actually a good quote for, and it's something that many of our ulama actually accept as well. It's quite, if we like, sorry, just one quote I'm going to read to you. Sorry. It's a quote from So Goldziher says, the theologian answers questions that lie outside the prophet's sphere of interest. So what he's trying to say, before I read the whole statement, is that prophets are a lot more comfortable about the Aql Naql issue than the theologians themselves are, right? So he says the theologian answers questions that lie outside the prophet's sphere of interest. The prophets are not really interested in all of these prophetology, eschatology, divinity. They're speaking directly to God. Why do they need to rationalize what God is or what God's will is, right? They don't need to rationalize it, they're feeling it. So he reconciles contradictions. So the prophet, the theologian reconciles contradictions the prophet would have been fine with. He devises inflexible formulas and erects rows upon rows of arguments into ramparts. So this is the theologian doing this, in the hope of securing these formulas against assault from within and without. So this is what the mutakallim is trying to do, right, with his akal in that sense, right? We need to defend the tradition. So then he derives all these systematically ordered tenets from the prophet's word. So what he's trying to do is look at most of the time is very, not infrequently from the most literal sense, looking at the prophet's words and then trying to defend these. Then what happens is, theologian disputes with theologian, each hurling the cunning arguments of an arrogant subtlety. So in other words, they look at themselves and they think, look, we've really understood this, and the others haven't. Now, they're using the same means of akal to refute one another. And they draw different conclusions from this. But essentially from the words of the Prophet, they're trying to do this. But the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would have been fine with these type of contradictions. That's the point that that sometimes we, in our limited understanding, tend to do. Now, one example is this of Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. And those of you who are Tullab al-Ilm or Ulama Ikram, you'd be familiar with many criticisms against Fakhruddin al-Razi. For example, his tafsir. They say about his tafsir that فيه كل شيء إلا التفسير. In it is everything other than tafsir. It's a bit of a harsh criticism against him because there's a lot in it, right? As well as tafsir, right? Rather than saying that there's nothing, no tafsir in it. Absolutely, there's tafsir in it. But one of the criticisms against him, and I saw this when I read the story of Dhul Qarnayn, is where he tries to identify him as Alexander the Great. And he actually has a habit, Imam Razi. And Imam Razi is one of these, there's no issue between Akal and Nakal peoples. So what he does is, he gives long dalils for all the worst positions, and then he just gives one line rather against them, right? So he's fantastic argument why Alexander the Great, Dhul Qarnayn could have been Alexander the Great. And then near the end, he just gives one sentence. Well, Aristotle was a mushrik, and for that reason, it's unlikely that Alexander would have been, a muwahhid. And then, okay, you thought that that would end the argument. Then he just puts Wallahu Ta'ala Alam. Now, the thing is with Wallahu Ta'ala, of course, Allah Ta'ala Alam, but when you put Wallahu Ta'ala Alam there, it's always, well, it could be the case. And this is one of the reasons that they used to say about Imam Razi in his book, Al-Matalib Al-Aliyah on Ilm al-Kalam. He actually deals with a lot of the contentions of the philosophers. And he detailed, you have to look at all of the arguments of the philosophers. He puts them, he articulates them so well. And then you just think, oh, this sounds all good. And then his response is always, Hada batil. That's it. And then this is one of the reasons the ulama used to say is that he says, Yuri the shubhu naqdan wa yurbihi nasi'atan. So he puts in these shubhat in cash, and then doubt he accrues. We'll talk about doubt next session. Doubt he accrues in interest. Right? So nagot dila is it? Shondo dila nagote are shondo dila nagote are bade shudar. He gets more thing kufr and heresy through this. So this is one of the problems sometimes with the whole akal and nakal thing, is that we can be deluded by akal. At least with nakal, there's still the rubrics, the matrix of the deen is there. Akal has free reign, whereas deen still sets boundaries. Tilka hududullah. Allah has hudud in that sense that he says, look, these are the boundaries, and everything's good within that. So this is an example as well of how our ulama sometimes can, and it's an example of sometimes rationalizing religion. You could lose the spirit of religion itself, right? And
that's a very interesting point. So I want to get to something related to that immediately after, but just to say in summary from yourself, between the monotheistic faiths of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, do you think that Islam and its sciences has it found a good balance between the needs of akal and nakal?
In short, absolutely.
Do you feel that Islam is more comfortable and is able to continue navigating and contributing through both, rather than maybe a clash somewhere?
Absolutely. Look, I really think the Muslims are far more comfortable with the challenges of science than perhaps some of the other religious traditions. Look, you don't really hear the Muslims go on and on about the creation story and anti-evolution stuff, or all other issues as well, for that matter. Is because we recognize theories. We ourselves engaged in theories in the past. We are our own cosmologies as well. Now we've got the heliocentric worldview. We had the geocentric worldview. We had all sorts of weird systems of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth, and Jupiter and Saturn, and the outer planets weren't there. And then we had these akals and all this sorts of crazy stuff, right? And we just changed these again and again. one other thing we don't have, Yahya, by centralized authority that the Christians have. The Jews didn't have it for a long time, except for the 19th century, right? You know, with the rise of anti-Semitism in the West, that they were actually forced to have a board of deputies, if you like, right? So now we absolutely had far more, I mean, the geocentric worldview, so the Earth being at the center of the solar system, we didn't need Galileos or any of this sort of stuff, because we had heliocentric views as well. Ibn Hazm was fond of the heliocentric worldview, that the sun is at the center of the solar system. Other times it was a case of some of the, if you look at some of our books, like the Ajaib al-Makhluqat, Qazwini, and many of the others, Hayat al-Haywan al-Kubra, you can see that we engage with the science of our times. There's also, in the 19th century, there was Sheikh Tantawi's book on, I think it's called Tafsir al-Jawhar, right? It's problematic, right? It's basically an encyclopedia of biology. And Sheikh Tantawi was Azhari alim. He was anti-evolution, but on many accounts, the ulama didn't like what he had to say. But nonetheless, absolutely, our religious tradition is far more easy with dealing with science and than perhaps Christianity, especially. Look, Christianity can become far more combative when it comes to this in our times now, from my experience, and to an extent Judaism as well. If you look at some of the Jewish rabbis online, they're not engaging with philosophy as they used to in about 500 odd years ago. They're not interested. Very much like especially with ultra-Orthodox Jewish scholars, they tend to quote the Torah more. So just like sometimes our ulama who just quoting Quran, look, sometimes you need to just engage with the philosophy, and Ibn Taymiyyah did that. You can see Imam Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, many of these ulama, that if you're going to speak logic, you can only use logic at that point. You don't go to argue with an atheist and quote him Surah Baqarah and some of the verses. He doesn't accept God in the first place. How is that? The words of God can impact him at that point. You'd have to get to those arguments, the dalils in the universe before the dalils of akhirah, in that sense.
Sure. I want to just move on a little bit more connected to the whole discussion of reason and revelation. Now, in regards to revelation, we have Torah as a revelation, we have Injil as a revelation. So if you like, the Torah of the Jews, and then the Bible, and then you have the Quran. Now, the Wahi, the revelation in your learning, what is the status as far as we understand? That is the highest source for Islam and Muslims. Now, is there are we comfortable with the fact that it is our highest source of authority?
Absolutely. Look, without that, with us, we have to believe that as well. There's two immutable truths that we have. Everything else is up for grabs in terms of Tijah al-Ummah. We can debate about everything. Is really Allah and His Messenger, and with Allah, it means Allah's kalam, and with Allah's Messenger is the fact that we believe in him and in his teachings. So Imam Shatibi also argued about the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and Sunnah is very important. Without the Sunnah, we wouldn't understand the Quran. It's actually quite difficult to just understand the Quran on its own. That's why we do need the Sunnah. And Imam Shatibi argued that the Sunnah is subordinate to the Quran, right? Others argued it's absolutely equal to the Quran because it's all part of Wahi. And Wahi is something, Yahya Bhai and everyone else, that in our times now, we have passed what was called the modern era. So the era of just science and the supremacy of science in that sense. And what happened was is the idea of knowledge that's not gained through the sound senses. So intuition and revelation and inspiration, these types of knowledge were rejected by philosophers, and even our own theologians. They said, "Laysal kashfu fi ithbat al-ilmi min shay." right? Even our mutakallimun. And in that way, our mutakallimun were no different from many of these skeptic, scientists in that sense. But postmodern philosophers are quite comfortable in accepting inspiration and intuition, so kashf and ilham, as forms of knowledge as well. I mean, what are we always told about science, right? What happened to Isaac Newton when he discovered the theory of gravity is that an apple fell on his head and he had basically a light bulb moment, a eureka moment. That eureka moment is nothing scientific. Yet from eureka moments, they, Einstein worked out E equals mc squared. So, but we think about that as Allam al insana malam ya'lam. So Allah taught Einstein malam ya'lam, and he was actually a believer. He accepts that sort of stuff, right? Same with Isaac Newton and many of they were philosophers as well. So postmodern philosophers are actually arguing that there are other avenues to knowledge rather than just empiricism and rationalism. Intuitionism is a path to knowledge. The only thing that and it's quite fascinating that they actually say, look, as for revelation, we'll say revelation has stopped. And this is quite interesting. Atheist scholars are saying now revelation has stopped, but they accept the fact that that can happen. And at the end of the day, any type of knowledge there's a type of knowledge is objective, which that we can all access. And then when we speak, we can understand each other. But there are types of knowledge that are subjective. And the Prophet ﷺ and all the other prophets and men of God and women of God who experienced karamat or any type of spiritual experience, if you like, we just take their word for it because it's their own subjective experience. And subjective knowledge is something which now, modern day philosophers are far more comfortable in accepting. And that should also be for us as well as Muslims recognizing that. So in other words, the whole akal nakal stuff, now we can be a lot more comfortable with the whole contradiction of nakal and akal anyway than probably before. In the modern period, it was a case of the supremacy of science. Now look, even psychology's moved forward. Now it's transpersonal psychology. They're thinking about, out of body experiences. Isn't that what the Sufis have been talking about for generations, right? There was a Pablo Neruda, I think is a thing. He spoke about science, and there is a crisis at the moment in the world about science and religion. And the only religion in the history of humanity that has tried to bridge that gap is Islam. Okay, and it is one that we just need to be a little bit more confident as well as Muslims, right? Our ulama karam as well. Look, the ulum al-aqliya, this is your heritage. You have access to that, right? And we should preserve it. We should engage in it. And when I went to Punjab University in 2019, I told the ulama karam there, Allama Siddiqui Saab, Professor Hamad Lakwi, and many of the other ulama karam there, look, you need to start, and the Pakistani sociologists, that they need to start looking at the madrasa syllabus or the traditional syllabus as how the Europeans look at the classics, teaching Greek and Latin. Greek and Latin still has ideological significance. Just recently, there's been an extremism case where the judge just said, oh, you need to study Greek and Latin. Well, we can say the same thing now. If you're an extremist, right, go and study Kitabullah wa Sunnati Rasulullah. Go study in a madrasa, become, know the tradition, know what's halal and haram. We could say the same thing. And another thing is, look, we can see this, that our ulama are, we can, about balance. I believe the word you used was, the balance between akal and nakal. Look, this tradition is one which has that balance embedded in it. The fact that I'm talking in the broadest terms. I'm not talking in terms of, in the broadest terms, we don't do taqleed of anyone other than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? In fiqh terms, yes, we do. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, whoever. But in the broadest terms, we don't. Right? And we don't have a pope. And that's really a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we don't have this. And that's the reason why Allah says, اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. They've taken, the Pope is the voice of God. People have to understand. This is the reason why Allah says that they've done shirk on this issue, right? They say they don't worship even the companions at the time said that they don't worship their priests and their rabbis. Well, they do. We can see this now, right? Because we can see the power structure that they have.
So is there just for our audience who have just joined, welcome. You are watching Tujah al-Ummah, Face the Ummah live on Facebook. Please do share, like, comment, and follow. We're honored to have Dr. Tajul Islam, Professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Leeds, England. We are talking about the if you like, between reason and revelation, or the idea of aql and naql, and how Islam has always been comfortable with the place for aql where it needs to be, and at the same time recognizes its limitation in comparison to the concept of a revelation. Now, logic and science, again, science has been reigning supreme for a very, very long time. It's very interesting that we are going through this massive pandemic for the last almost 2 years, and science has been working tirelessly in trying to find a cure or a vaccine that is 100% in dealing with this current corona virus, if you like, COVID-19 virus. Science is yet to have something solid, Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam. Does that not also tell us that science, as great as it is essentially a human endeavor?
Yeah, of course. This is the thing is if you like, the sacralization of science really comes. You could probably say the Marxists were the first to sort of, this idea of enlightenment through science is throwing off the shackles of religion, and that's what it was. People forget that science itself, as we understand it, the natural sciences were taught in the universities, so in Oxford and Cambridge, when they were taught here in the West, and all of the natural sciences were part of the divinity, so they were part of teaching theology. So all that's happened with science is that at the end of the word science in Arabic is just ilm. It's just one extra ilm. So, and science isn't all encompassing. There's so many different aspects of science. Even social sciences is a science, right? One of the things that we tend to forget is, and I think our madrasa texts don't delve too deeply into these, is logical fallacies, right? So the logical fallacies is important. I guess, in English maybe, and the madaris in Bangladesh, they might want to consider teaching logical fallacies. And these are easier because we've learned over time, in general speech, the linguists have actually looked at, when we're making arguments, why are our arguments weak? We've got framing as well, the way our question is framed, all of these things. So science and logic in that sense. Look, one of the things that science has, and this is where we've been very comfortable, and I'm going to mention this now, and I probably will next time as well, is ilm al-hadith. Generally speaking, most Western scholars look at ilm al-hadith and they call it science, and it is scientific. What makes ilm al-hadith scientific is what science itself makes scientific is falsification, right? If for anything to be scientific, it has to be falsifiable, and that's something that we tend to forget, right? And that's why Muslims are quite comfortable, is because of our ilm al-hadith. And it goes on to the next topic we'll cover next week, I think it's next week, is that hadith is quite comfortable in falsifying. In fact, first, let's prove your innocence in that sense, right? For you to be able to speak about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for you to have that privilege as well, right? So for you to earn that privilege to say anything about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in that sense, look, we have, I believe, look, we should be proud as a community as well. The Muslims in this country Muslimuna fil Alam al Arabi as well, we have actually been far better at accepting the vaccine, even if we've had issues. In fact, was it a Turkish couple who invented they were the first to actually invent the vaccine. Our communities here in England as well have been very receptive to this, and wearing the masks as well. We've been good on this stuff, right? We haven't been taking it like many who have white privilege. I don't want to wear this mask. We should continue to do this, and it also shows our humility towards people of knowledge as well. Muslims are quite comfortable. Okay, doctor, you've got you've got more knowledge on this topic. We'll submit to your understanding of this on this topic. Ahl al-Takhassus. Ibn Taymiyyah said this about how do we deal with the geocentric worldview, or the heliocentric worldview. He was asked this question. He says, you go to the people of Takhassus on this, right? You don't need to think. It's fine. They're the people of Takhassus. Go to the Ilm al-Falaq, see what they say. So likewise with us, we could go to these, the scientists, and it's fine, right? You've got an understanding of this. We'll take this on guard. And it's also, we need some himmat from our ulama karam as well to take these type of discussions, and they are as well.
Now connecting, thank you very much, Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam. Just to say, for those who just joined, welcome to Tujah al-Ummah, Face the Ummah. We're live on Facebook. Please like, share, comment, and follow. And if you've missed a lot of the live, you can catch up afterwards. If you have any comments, don't forget to send them through. Over time, we will try to read as many as possible and take as much feedback as possible. We are with Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam, Professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Leeds in England. And wherever you're watching from, it's an honor to have you. আপনারা যারা যেখান থেকে দেখতেছেন সবাইকে শুভেচ্ছা, স্বাগতম। তুজাহ আল-উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে, ফেস দ্য উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে আমরা লাইভ সেশন আজকে করতেছি যুক্তি এবং ওয়াহি নিয়ে। যুক্তি এবং ওয়াহি নিয়ে, যেটার মানে বিভিন্ন রকমের ধারণা, বিভিন্ন রকমের ডিবেট, ঐতিহাসিক অথবা এই যুগের ভিতরে ডিবেট গুলো, কিন্তু ইসলামের পজিশন, যুক্তির পজিশন কি এবং ওয়াহি কি, আমরা তো সব সময় জানি যে ওয়াহি হইল সর্বোত্তম যে জ্ঞান এবং আমাদের দিনের সোর্স, কিন্তু তার মানে না যে যুক্তির কোনো জায়গা নেই। যুক্তির অবশ্য জায়গা আছে। যুক্তি নিয়ে আমাদের কোনোদিন মানে অসাধারণ কোনো সমস্যা হয়নি ঐতিহাসিকভাবে, এবং এখনো হবে না, সামনে দিয়ে হবে না। আমরা ব্যক্তিগতভাবে কি আমাদের কোনো সমস্যা হইতে পারে, বাট আমরা একটা দিনের শিক্ষা হিসাবে আমাদের কোনো সময় সমস্যা হয়েছিল না। বিভিন্ন আলিম উলামারা বিভিন্ন চ্যালেঞ্জে পড়ছেন, ওদের মানে আকলে ডুবতে এমন একটা পর্যায়ে গেছেন, ওইটার ভিতরে নিজে কোনো একটা বিপদে পড়ছেন, কিন্তু ইসলামের পক্ষ থেকে কোনোদিন মানে যে বাধা দেয়নি যে মানে এই শিক্ষা অর্জন করা যে যুক্তির জায়গা নাই। অবশ্যই যুক্তির জায়গা ওভারঅল আছে, এবং আমাদের দিনের শিক্ষা সাধারণভাবে দৈনন্দিন জীবনের ভিতরে যুক্তি, সবকিছু যুক্তি ভিত্তিক, আলহামদুলিল্লাহ রাব্বিল আলামিন। তো আপনারা যারাই দেখতেছেন, লাইক করবেন, শেয়ার করবেন, ফলো করবেন, কমেন্টস করবেন। আমরা আছি ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, প্রফেসর অফ ইসলামিক স্টাডিজ at the University of Leeds. What I want to ask, or just kind of touch on, is that there are critiques from within the Muslim world and external critiques when it comes to kind of saying that Islam is it's not logical enough, it's not scientific enough. How do we is it that is it that they are having a problem in terms of finding the light, or that they can't see the light because of their own biases and their own lackings, basically? So we have many Muslim academics, if you like, from within the community that have been heavily, if you like, dependent upon Orientalist kind of tradition and narratives, to a very, if you like, a very atheistic, godless rooted academia. And then it feels like they're trying to thrust that sense of what they feel as being the new light and the new sense of truth on Islam and Muslims, in terms of its past tradition and its present and possibly its future. So how do we speak to those within our community that have every right to ask questions, because Islam is a very big place for questions, and then those who are perhaps deliberately trying to create something that is to almost question that which we have been comfortable with.
Right, okay. So the argument that Islam is not logical, well, anything which is illogical will fall flat on its face very quickly. And look, one of the things that we're seeing now for a long time as well. Remember, Islam is at the moment the only thing standing in the face of absolute, Western domination in that sense in the world is Islam. And what we're seeing is a resurgence of religion, and really Islam is leading the way. Look, other peoples are now following, right? The Hindus and the Buddhists and others are seeing a type of self-confidence they're gaining in their own religious traditions, really is because of the Muslims. Now, the argument that Islam is illogical, quite frankly, a lot of that stuff is just bias, right? And it's also subjective as well. So what is logical? Communism is logical. Capitalism is logical, right? None of it makes sense ever to anybody else. And also for those within, look, a lot of the times it's quite easy to internalize racism. So those academics you're talking about who have very much succumbed to, if you want to say, a godless academic thing, it is. A lot of the times you can see that, God is phased out from the equation when in the study of religion at times. But now what's happening is that they're a bit out of date, because even in the study of religion, they do accept your subjectivity. So my subjectivity as a Muslim, now the academy accepts. Before, they used to argue this stuff, that if you're Muslim, you can't be neutral. So the only way you can be neutral is if you're an atheist. Why? Why would an atheist? An atheist has already killed God. Well, in their understanding, right? There is no God. Right? How is it you can be objective? How does that mean objective? So basically, you're already saying that God doesn't exist, and that's an objective fact. For you to be objective. And one of the problems is that confidence is the key thing. I really think confidence is the key thing for us as Muslims as well. I'll give you an example, and I know this is might be a bit comical and a bit anecdotal, but there is an example on a BBC interview. I believe it was Yalda Hakim. She's gone to Nigeria, and this is before the advent of Boko Haram. So there was a lot of the Sharia movements in the late 90s and the early 2000s. There was a move for introducing Sharia in Muslim majority areas in Nigeria. So the Hausa peoples. So not in the Igbo or the
Yoruba in the north, peoples. You mean mainly in the north?
In the north, mainly in the north. Back in the 90s, a lot of this stuff. But the interview, I believe it was in the early 2000s, before the advent of Boko Haram. So she goes to this Qazi, and the Qadi is meted out hard punishment against a thief, and it's a first offense. So he's decided to whip him or something about 10 times. So, right? And the thing is, she's saying, oh, right, if in our country, in Britain, this type of corporal punishment would be, it just wouldn't be acceptable. And the Qadi is like, why not? It's good, do it, right? And it's just like, she didn't know how to respond, because obviously he's like saying, and if you think about it as well, what is he saving? He's saving you the prison industrial complex, modern day slavery. Everyone's saying about slavery. This is the guy saying this. Well, just 10 whacks on the back, right? Humiliation for 10 days, right? For a while, or really taking away somebody's freedom in that sense, right? But the thing is, it's the confidence that he said it in. That word, freedom, democracy, none of that stuff even stood in his way. He doesn't know do it. What's wrong? Why doesn't England incorporate this? So the point is, this is really a lot of this stuff comes from our own sense of confidence as well. Look, with Zionism, what do the Zionists say? Well, what is their argument? Their argument is, it says in the book that that land belongs to us. That's it. What is their argument? to the United Nations that the Bible says this document, right, which the atheists don't believe in, says that we have a right to that land, and they say it with confidence. So confidence is the biggest thing in that sense, right? As Muslims, if we have confidence, right, Khudi, as Iqbal said, then the world's our, I mean, look at Ali Shariati and many of the others. These people spoke with confidence, and even pardon, even many postmodern philosophers actually listen to them. Water, please. Pardon me, I need some water. Sorry, we need some water.
No problem, Sheikh. Thank you. Yeah, you can if you want. Do you need to grab some water?
No, he's getting it.
Okay.
No problem.
Jazakallah khair. Just to let all our viewers who are watching, thank you for joining us. You're watching Face the Ummah live on Facebook. We are with Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam, Professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Leeds in England. We're talking about in between reason and revelation, aql and naql, and its place and space within Islam and Muslim thought. If you like, from the origins of our tradition. All the way to this time, and also some of the perhaps challenges and criticisms that exist, or the critics that are within and the critics externally. In regards to the criticism from within, in your own studies of those from within, if you like, within the Muslim community that are seeking to critique Islamic thought and the thought process, do you find that they are often very objective enough, or there are other issues that have affected they themselves, and therefore they've taken a position that they're taking?
One of the things that those, especially those who are of the reform agenda. So you do have these academics who are of the reform agenda. The problem is that many of them are not traditionally trained, right? So that becomes a problem as well. Now, they're a bit late as well, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Very late in the game, in that sense, is that in academia now there's a growing trend called decoloniality. I'm not sure if your viewers are familiar with this term. So decoloniality. So there's basically three strands of thought that are in vogue at the moment. Right, and these three strands of thought, we as Muslims,
when you say in vogue, as in fashion, if you like.
In fashion at the moment, yeah. In fashion at the moment.
Yeah.
Right. So these three are in fashion at the moment in academia around the world. So one of them is post-colonial studies. So that is Bangladesh. When I went to Dhaka University as well, there, many of the scholars there in the humanities are very much interested in post-colonial studies in India, and obviously in Pakistan as well when I went to Pakistan. So these countries very much, post-colonial studies is actually looking at the world after Britain and France and others have left. And post-colonial studies, from there, you're trying to rebuild a type of future, right? So that's a good way of looking at, re-evaluating ourselves. In Latin America, they've got a strand of thought called decolonial studies. So that one is about actually reclaiming power, in a sense, or dismantling colonial knowledge, colonial power over us, right? And then you've got what's called critical race theory or critical black studies as well at times, right? So that's the black experience in America, which is different to obviously the black experience in Africa. So those three strands right now are some of the most dynamic ways of studying the arts, and the arts especially, sometimes even the sciences, but the arts especially. Now the problem is that if you're talking about reform and you're not talking about decolonizing, because the whole idea of the reform project is because the white man came to our tradition and says, you guys are barbarians, you're backwards, and you really need to catch up to the West. But now what's happened in academia is, because of post-colonial studies and decolonial studies and critical race theory, people are resisting on an epistemic level, on ilmi level, if you like, an ilmi nizaq against this stuff. And so these reform type peoples, you know, there is an alternative to Western knowledge, and the Muslims have preserved that. Look, unfortunately, many of these other traditions don't have their traditional knowledge base like we do. We as Muslims, you know, from east to west, we do have the whole Madaris system, and that in itself becomes a decolonial, you can say, an empowerment tool. The study of the Deen in the madrasa itself becomes decolonial, and that's something that they don't have. So, you know, these peoples are you saying that are very much crying about reform and the rest of it. Look, we're never going to be good enough. I can quote, obviously, the verse of the Quran, "Walan tarda anka al-yahud walan nasara," right? We're at such a state now that a Muslim can't even be an atheist. Forget reforming, forget, making things easy for people. You cannot even be an atheist. What do I mean by this? You've heard the term ex-Muslims. There's so much hatred for Muslims now that even if you say you're an ex-Muslim, believe me, they're gonna, right? You're still a Muslim, right? Remember, it happened to the Jews, it will happen to you as well, right? If you're gonna just give up on everything, there you've got no chance, right? There is no, la mafarra illa illallah. You have to understand that, right? We're at that stage now, and look, we all have iman yazid wa yankus, iman tabari, but we have to realize that, look, the only thing we have is kalimat, that's the only thing we have. And these peoples, unfortunately, they've very much internalized that racism. They really believe that we're going to be successful if we follow the white man. How now? Look, China has become more powerful than the West now. Russia's become dominant now. Look, there's an emerging India, Brazil as well. There's a South Africa, a black South Africa now. A black controlled South Africa is becoming one of these powers now. We need to get out of this mentality that the white man is our our master. And that's the problem as well that you're talking about, is the fact that we still think knowledge is white and power is white as well, right? Well, power is white at the moment, but we have to challenge that power.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Dr. Tajul Islam. Those who have just joined us, welcome to Face the Ummah, to Jahal Ummah, live on Facebook. We are talking about the in between reason and revelation, the whole status of aql and naql within the Muslim tradition and paradigm, and also talking about, if you like, criticism and critique. Now, Sheikh, we just have a few minutes left. Inshallah, on the next session towards the end, we would like to get to know you a little bit more. So we'll have a few personal questions, but today I'm going to, not go for those. We have a format where we get to find out from yourself about you a bit more. And also just to take note that next week, what we would want from you, apart from dealing with the idea of doubt and the doubt industry, is also maybe your 5 priorities for the Muslim Ummah as a whole. So we always like to get a perspective on what you see as a professor, as a sheikh, as a teacher, when you look down at the Muslim world and what you and the globe, if you like, and where Muslims are, what those 5 priorities would be for you. So that's something that, inshallah, we look forward to hearing from you on the next session. Now, as we kind of tie this session up, or the idea of aql and naql, or reason and revelation, is Islam common sense?
In short, this is something a lot of people say. In fact, even my elder brother actually says this as well, right? That, look, as far as I understand it, Islam is common sense. Yes, in many ways it is common sense. There will be times where our sense might let us down, but yes, in short, yes, Islam is common sense. It is common sense in the sense that we ourselves recognize urf, ada, as deen as well, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, in short, that's the answer, that it is. We can.
Jazakallah khair. Now, in your studies in this particular area of the idea of reason and revelation, what have you, as an academic, found challenging, and what would be your advice for academic, students and people of academia who are studying Islam. And I think when we keep using the term academia, we're maybe downplaying the whole madrasa system. It would be nice maybe someday to talk about the madrasa. It was quite interesting. You mentioned right at the beginning that there was a time where even the most far-fetched thought person was attending a madrasa within the Muslim world. I mean, the thing is, the concept of the word madrasa, as from the Arabic stance, has been a school. I mean, the thing is, this kind of thing has turned slightly different in the subcontinent, where we are having to, through a colonial process, come to terms with the idea that there's a religious concept to a school and there is a school. If you could maybe so is there an issue here? Are we, is other subcontinent madrasas in this kind of context lacking? What is there anything more that needs to be added to it for it to be that madrasa that perhaps was generally known as madrasa, of that time that you were referring to? I'm not sure if I made it clear for you, because obviously now we have the word madrasa within the subcontinent specifically refers to where religion is studied or Islam is studied, whereas where you were referring to a time where almost a more far-fetched Muslim was still attending a madrasa.
Well, in fact, not far-fetched Muslims, the Jews and the Christians and the Sabians and others were actually attending our madrasas, because the mosque itself was the madrasa. When the madrasa left the mosque, knowledge became a bit more institutionalized in that sense. So all the sciences were taught. So if any of you had the privilege of being to Spain and the Umayyad Mosque there, you can see a lot of pillars everywhere. And the only reason, structurally, you don't need that many pillars, right? Even in Hazrat Shah Jalal al-Mazar, you'll see so many pillars. Structurally, you don't need that many pillars. Why are those pillars there? Because those pillars were classes. So a class on medicine, a class on grammar, a class on mathematics, a class on tafsir, a class on hadith, a class on poetry, a class on everything. And in fact, look, this is Mufti Taqi Usmani's book in Urdu. Aap Dars-e Nizami Kaise Paraye. If you can find this book anywhere, I've lost it years ago. I had it. It's a very small pamphlet. Aap Dars-e Nizami Kaise Paraye. And in that, he talks about the older syllabus actually had music in it as well. So music was taught in the Dars-e Nizami. And so this is during the Mughal times as well. Yes, the idea of the school itself. Look, before the British, the Ingres, they dismantled the madaris. Farangi Mahal. So Farangi Mahal was where the
Sure, we have 2 minutes just to let you know. Yeah. So if you feel that it's going to be a long discussion, we can pick it up again.
The sort of separation between secular and look, this was imposed upon us because we never had that type of demarcation, and even our madaris had non-Muslims studying with us, right? So even Imam Abu Hanifa, we used to debate with atheists in the mosque. Imagine debating with atheists in a mosque, right? And the fact that they felt comfortable coming to a mosque, right? It's all right. We'll talk about God in the mosque. Yes, so. Yes, so
I think Sheikh, just to say, I think this will be an interesting subject that we would want to pick up on, and we will definitely invite you again. Only in the obviously we've got a second session next week, inshallah, but soon with maybe the Madaris system and the way it has evolved and the challenge and strength and opportunities, I think would be an interesting discussion. Zarai দেখতেছেন সবাইকে আবার ওয়েলকাম করতেছি ফেস দ্য উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে তুজাহাল উম্মা। আজকে আমাদের সাথে এতক্ষণ ছিলেন ডক্টর প্রফেসর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, ইসলামিক স্টাডিজ এর প্রফেসর, ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ লিডস ইংল্যান্ডের। তো আপনারা যারা প্রোগ্রাম মিস করছেন অবশ্যই আপনারা দেখতে পারবেন ফেস দ্য উম্মার পেজে গেলে। আপনাদের ফিডব্যাক কমেন্টস সবগুলো আপনারা দিবেন, ইনশাআল্লাহ আমরা চেষ্টা করব সেগুলো নেওয়ার জন্য। আমরা চেষ্টা করতেছি আরবিক, ইংলিশ এবং বাংলা ভাষাগুলো ইউজ করার জন্য। আমাদের যেইটাতে বেশি দক্ষ সেটাই আমরা কাজে লাগাবো। আমরা এখন শেখকে উইড লাইক টু থ্যাংক ইউ শেখ on behalf of Face the Ummah and all of our audience, which is slowly building, inshallah, for giving us your precious time. May Allah accept it, forgive all our shortcomings, and we look forward to you again on a very important topic of the time, which is the idea of doubt and the doubt our industry and how it's impacting human beings in general, and maybe some of the communities of faith, including myself and us as Muslims. So Jazakumullah khair once again on behalf of Face the Ummah, Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam, for being with us.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.